everyone. My name is Rafal, and I would like to welcome everyone to my today's podcast. Today, I have a very special guest, someone who I've been following for many years. He's an amazing photographer, also amazing educator. Miguel Quiles is with me today, and we're gonna have hopefully long, interesting chat about photography, about AI, about business. We also talk a little bit before we kind of went live about pandemic and COVID and how this whole thing impact us. Miguel, thank you for accepting my invitation to my podcast. This is something I've been waiting for I would say many years. So I truly honored to have you on my podcast, and thank you for accepting my invitation. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Hey, listen, Rafal, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for supporting me over the years and encouraging me over the years, and just really excited to be here with you today. And yeah, let's do this. It's gonna be great.
Perfect. Okay, so let's start with something which probably a lot of people know, but this is the first question I always ask. Please tell me a little bit, how did you get into photography? Because it seems like everyone has some kind of crazy story behind it. You know, there are people who, they have nothing to do with photography, and all of a sudden they jump into this and they dedicated their life. So tell me, what was your story? Because it seems like you've been in this industry for many years. You've been hanging on with all those obstacles, pandemics, and then crazy stuff which are happening in this industry, but somehow you were able to hang on to till today. So tell me how this whole thing started with you.
Yeah, so it's a funny question. I feel like my photography career or my introduction to photography had two starting points. Um, the original starting point was back in, I guess, 2000, 1999,
Okay.
2000, somewhere in that ballpark. Um, I had nothing to do with photography up
Mhm.
until I was, around 20. And at the time, I was very big into cars and video games. That was my two things. I would play competitively. I would go to car shows. I spent every last dollar that I had on my car and buying things, upgrading things, going to car shows, doing all that kind of stuff. And um, so I was working at a video game store, which ultimately became a GameStop. And while I was working at this GameStop, there was a store that was directly across. I was in a mall, and there was a store that was directly across from me that was an electronics shop. And every day I would come into work, and the manager who worked at this electronics shop would come by every morning, very casual, drinking coffee, and he would say, "Hey, do you want to make some real money?" And I'm like, I'm good. I would look across the way. The store's always, it's open, but there wasn't people there. I was like, how's this guy talking about making money? And my store is hopping all day long, and his store is dead.
Mhm.
So one thing leads to another. I decide to go ahead and make that jump and start
Mhm.
working. And it was a camera store. It was an electronics store, but their primary business was selling SLR cameras, digital cameras, which were an emerging technology at the time, selling camcorders. And so, and I didn't know anything about any of that. I didn't grow up with, cameras in my life, which was unfortunate because a lot of my life I don't have documentation other than my memories, which oftentimes can be foggy. But so I started working at this camera store, and I quickly realized that in order to sell cameras and you know just have discussions with people coming in that were telling me they wanted to look at stuff, I had to learn photography. And so I was very fortunate that the store was cool. They actually would let you buy whatever you wanted to buy, and then you could tell them, take it out of my check and
Mhm.
do it out of the next like four paychecks. So they would just say if it was $1,000, they just take
Mhm.
250 out of each paycheck, which was great. For a 20-something-year-old guy, it felt like I was buying it on credit of sorts. And so I bought my first SLR camera, bought my first camcorder, and I would take it to car shows. I would photograph people, photograph friends, And so that was my early introduction into photography. But then, it kind of was just like at first it was work, and then it became a little bit of a hobby throughout most of like the 2000s to about 2010
Mhm.
ish, where I just decided, I don't want to work for corporate America anymore. I'm tired of the trajectory, how things were going, and
Mhm.
I decided I wanted to go back to school. So went back to college to finish up my degree. And while I was in college, I decided, I kind of want to see if I can make photography into a business and
Mhm.
make some money with this and take all the experience that I've had over the last 10 years and parlay that into photography. And so that's kind of the second start, which is
Mhm.
kind of what's led me to where I am now. Was just basically making that leap of like, I want to do this for a career and I want to photograph something. I didn't know at the time that it was going to be portrait photography. So I, photographed anything and everything to try to figure out
Yeah.
what spoke to me.
Yeah. So what was the process getting into portrait photography? Because like there's a lot of photographers starting from completely different genres of photography. Like for example, like I started with weddings for decades,
Right.
believe it or not.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, okay, I'm done with this. I still want to stay in the industry, but I had to change something. And I thought that weddings are just too much. So what was your kind of path into portrait? Was this like right away you just felt, okay, I want to photograph people? Because you said you've been trying different things, but like how this process look like and what leads you into the portrait photography?
So it was kind of an interesting thing. I didn't know what I wanted to do in
Hmm.
terms of photography, but I did know some things. And the one thing I would say that I did know was that I liked people and I
Hmm.
liked working with people. And so um, I just had that leaning towards like, okay, how can I work with people and make this happen? And so I did what you did. I started in weddings, did a lot
Okay.
of engagement shoots. Um, and I just ultimately landed on portrait photography because it was something that I was doing well at, and gave me the opportunity to work with people and talk to people. And it was always a great feeling when like you do a photo shoot and they would take your photo and turn it into their profile pic,
Hmm. Yeah.
so that's how it started.
Perfect. So tell me a little bit about your creative process. I know like we're going to be jumping all over the place a little bit,
Oh yeah.
because you are doing a lot of creative stuff. And then, one of the things which like I just want to share my experience just a little bit that I
Hmm.
remember um, when I jump into this headshot photography genre. I started like really pushing some creative stuff, and that was really makes me like I was getting motivated because you could do something different, something creative, something which just kind of kind of is different, right? And I've noticed you doing this the same, and but you're doing this on the much bigger scale. So can you tell me a little bit about like first of all about the creative process? Like where are you getting ideas from? Are you just kind of like more are you planning this whole thing ahead? I personally like to do some stuff, kind of in a spontaneous way, just come up with some concept and just kind of see where this whole thing is going to take me. And the second thing I want to also talk about it a little bit, if we're going to divide this question to two kind of portions. The second one, how much percentage is your creative work and the stuff what you have to do to pay the bills? Because I know this is one
Yeah.
of the most common question I'm getting. Like, how can you live of doing creative stuff? Like, technically you can't, but I would like to hear your kind of perspective on this topic.
Yeah, so it's a good question, good set of questions. I would say the first half of that, as far as where the creativity and the inspiration comes from, a lot of it comes from just consuming media.
Hmm.
So, for example, for me, and it's been like this from day one, I have subscriptions to pretty much every magazine that you can think of,
Oh wow, okay.
every fashion magazine you can think of. I have digital subscriptions, I have print subscriptions, and I'm always consuming that media. I watch a lot of anime, and so oftentimes I'm inspired by, the shows and the movies and media that I'm consuming. That's not necessarily photography,
Hmm.
but maybe it's more of a lighting thing. Maybe it's more of a styling thing. I recently got onto playing the new Final Fantasy game on PS5, and
Hmm.
from day one, I've always been a big Final Fantasy fan, and the style that these artists, the wardrobe ideas that they come up with for these characters, I'm just like, man, I would love to do a photo shoot where I have, people that are dressed like this. And so, a lot of that kind of gets put into a little bit of like a dream bin of sorts.
Hmm.
And then it becomes one of those things where, as the time and the opportunities avail themselves, I try to execute on one or all of those ideas. So, it could be that some of the ideas are kind of close to one another. And
Hmm.
so if an opportunity presents itself to be able to make the shoot like that happen, then I make it happen. So, the inspiration comes from a lot of places. I think the other thing as well is I learned this years ago that if you partner up with other creative people,
Hmm.
that also can help you tremendously. So I was very fortunate when I was in New Jersey that, I had a lot of creative people that were available to me in that area. My makeup artist who I worked with at the time, super creative person. And she would come to the table with her ideas, and she was hyped up to make them happen. And I was hyped up to execute on those ideas. So
Hmm.
I think for photographers that are starting out, it's important for you to have your own creativity, to be able to execute on your own expressions and ideas. But I also think it's a good idea for you to be able to partner up with other creative people and try to figure out your creativity within their creativity, and execute on their ideas and kind of put your own flavor and stamp on it. Because from a commercial perspective, you're going to have to do that. You're going to have clients that will come to you and say, here's the idea that we have. We want you to shoot this. And you have to be able to do that if you want to make money and you want to survive. So,
Yeah.
I think doing that helps to just form your creative voice. And I created some of my best work in in
Mhm.
in that process. So,
Mhm.
and
So
then the
now,
second
can you
part,
tell me how you can implement creative work into your business? Because that's one of the biggest questions I've been receiving, right? Like, how you can merge the creative part of you and then, still make some money. Because, like, I know from my own experience, sometimes this is difficult part, right? Because,
right?
everyone wants photographers to be creative, but not too many want to pay for it, because that's the
Yeah.
biggest issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to look back to how I started with
Hmm.
photography in terms of like when I started my business. And I think the thing that people kind of just like maybe take for granted, or maybe they don't think about it, is that when you're doing your creative work, that's nobody has to know that that creative work is not paid,
Hmm.
right? So
That's
externally to
true.
the world, as far as from a marketing perspective, when I would do my creative work, it felt like it was commercial work,
Hmm.
right? To the audience, to the people that are viewing these images. I'm not going out there and saying, "Hey, I had a great free photo shoot today,"
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That would be silly. And if I did that, imagine if it was a business near you that said, "Hey, we gave away 500 hamburgers today, and look at all these people that showed up."
Hmm.
Well, tomorrow there's going to be more people that show up for free
Exactly.
hamburgers, right?
Yeah.
But if you are putting out creative work and you're just saying, "Hey, here's my latest work," and you share those images, you would be very surprised how many people will come through and be like, "Hey, I've got this project that I have in mind. I think you'd be great for it."
Hmm.
Um, I think it's a matter of capturing mind share with people. And by that I mean that if you're constantly putting out images, constantly putting out work, and people are on your social media, they start, you'll build up a following of people that maybe come across your work and they're just waiting for the right opportunity to work with you. If you're constantly putting new imagery in front of them, when that time comes and they're ready to make some kind of a jump to hire somebody for that kind of work,
Mhm.
you're going to come to mind because you're always putting out images, right? From their perspective, it looks like you're working all the time. The reality is that you could just be doing test shoots and you've got all these creative ideas and you're just executing on those ideas. Um, and so the hope is that it gets in front of the right people at the right time. And obviously, you have all the experience because you're shooting.
Mhm.
And when you get that opportunity, that paid opportunity, you kill it because
Yes.
it's not like, oh, I'm just sitting here waiting. And if
Yeah.
I had to sit and wait from when I first started as a photographer for that first paying client before I actually went out and started to do some of the stuff I was doing, I wouldn't be here today.
Yes.
I wouldn't be on this podcast. So, um, that's what worked for me in the very beginning was basically shoot every single opportunity. And that was multiple times a week doing photo shoots, friends, family, friends of friends, people I run into in public, referrals, anybody,
Yeah.
Instagram people, Facebook people, I don't care, like any
Where
human beings that I could photograph and do some kind of creative thing with them, get them in front of my camera, let me photograph them, post those images. Don't ever say that it was from a free photo shoot. And
just keep
in
pushing.
time, yeah, in time, that's how it goes.
Also, what I would like to add to this, and this is also my experience, that you just don't know which image or whatever you post out there, who's gonna see it, right? Because I
True.
had stories where one particular, which was kind of crazy, I did this like really crazy, creative shoot with some flowers in the hair, whatever, and people are like, this is crazy, who would pay for it? And believe it or not, there's a company out of Israel who actually produces those flowers for the world. And
Right.
they reach out to me and they say, hey, you know what, we saw those images, we would like to buy them from you, we would like to also do some photo shoots in the future. And then it was like a big shift for me, because you just have no idea who's gonna see it, who's gonna get kind of attract to this, and where this whole thing is gonna lead you. And I think this is a lot of photographers they're missing, because as you said, they just create couple of shoots, the images turned good, and they have this big expectation that all of a sudden, this whole thing is gonna come to them. But as you said, it's just constantly pushing workout, constantly keep shooting, keep shooting, keep shooting, and then you just building this really strong foundation to grow your business and grow your photography skills and then all this stuff. Yeah, that's I 100% stand behind your words for sure.
Yeah, it's 100% the case. I mean, you really truly never know who is out there watching your stuff,
Hmm.
and the biggest thing is that you have to show up. If you don't show up, if you're not posting, if you're not putting your work out into the public, um nobody's ever going to know who you are. They're not going to remember you, and if they don't remember you, you can't say, "Oh, it's their fault."
Hmm.
It's your fault. It's your fault that you're not remembered for doing whatever it is that you do. If you're a portrait photographer, if you've got a certain style, you should dominate that style. You should dominate that category and make it to where if anyone ever thinks, hey, I want studio portraits that are creative, that are lit a certain way, that they say, oh yeah, I know this guy Rafal. He, that's what he does. And
Hmm.
if you have enough people doing that over time, um, you get to the point to where you don't have to take every gig.
Absolutely.
You could be more selective over the gigs that you take. The ones that are more fulfilling, the ones that are more collaborative, you can partake of those things. So
Absolutely. So your images have this specific style. So this is another question what I have, and this is
mhm.
also the question what I've been receiving quite often: how to build and how to create your own style of photography.
Yeah,
I know, and this is the kind of the second portion of the question: how your style developed over the years, because you've been in this industry, it seems like, for 2 decades. So
yeah.
you probably see how this whole thing progress over the time. So
Mhm.
my first part of the question, how you kind of see your style change, and the second portion of the question is, what would be your advice to developing your own style?
Yeah, I mean, if I look back at the second start, which was the start of my true career as a photographer, and I look back, I think to myself, I wanted to start a business, and I had actually started two businesses prior to being a photographer. And when I started those businesses, I basically started this one the same type of way,
Mhm.
even though it's a totally different industry, totally different business. But the idea was I wanted to know and really put thought into what is my what is my brand,
Mhm.
right? How would I describe, if I could describe it in one or two words, what do I want my brand to be? And as part of that, what do I want my images to be described as? And if you don't have an idea of what that is, it's very hard to develop a creative style because you're going to be up and down. You're going to be all over the place. One day you're doing dark and moody, next day you're doing something else. And photography is one of those things where I feel like you really have to dedicate yourself to a certain style. Like
Mhm.
if you look at any successful brands anywhere, their brands are very dialed in, right?
Mhm.
You don't have McDonald's trying to delve into like the $20 hamburger market, right?
Mhm.
Like they're steady Eddie. They produce like a C or a D level quality, burger,
Mhm.
and but they do it consistently, right? As to where maybe somewhere else they do fancy burgers and they could charge you a little bit more, and and they're not competing doing the 50-cent cheeseburger, right?
Mhm.
So as a photographer, I kind of did the same thing. And the two words that I wanted to describe my images was clean and crisp.
Mhm.
And so I started with those two words, clean and crisp. And I said, okay, I want my logo to reflect that. I want my website to reflect that. I want my images as I shoot them to reflect that. And over a period of time, as I focused on those two words and what that meant to me, and how I could show that in my images, it just kind of formed. It became this thing where, uh, people would talk about my images, and without being prompted, without knowing that this is what I said and what I set out to do, they would go and say, "Oh, Miguel's got really clean and crisp images," and I'm like, "Thank you."
That's what I want to hear.
You
Yeah.
know, that's what I wanted to hear. Like it by dumb luck. That's who would have thought, right? But so that's what I would recommend to people who are, trying to figure out if they're starting out. First, land on what it is that you like to do, because there are some crazy people that love to shoot weddings. Like I wasn't that guy. I did it because I knew it was a way to make money. And obviously, photography is not cheap. All this stuff costs money, and you have to be able to make money to afford some of these things. So, weddings to me were kind of the low hanging fruit to be able to make that happen.
Mhm.
But I quickly figured out, okay, this isn't something that I want to do long term. Um, and so once I dialed into that, it was like, okay, so now every single time I shoot, these are the two words. This is the mantra. This is like the battle cry, clean and crisp. What does that look like?
Mhm.
And just execute on that, time and
Absolutely.
time again. And over the course of time, people start to get to know you for that.
Mhm. Perfect. Okay, so let's switch the gears and let's kind of move to some heavy duty stuff.
Mhm.
So you've built your career 20 years, you're established, and now we're hitting 2023. All this AI technology coming in, everyone is panicking. It's kind of interesting to me that people right now more panicking that when we hit COVID. That's the kind of the,
Right.
the most interesting part. Even COVID was crazy, and I think a lot of photographers got wiped out because what was happening around the world, and how this whole thing kind of we got locked in. We couldn't work. Everyone who was basically on the edge kind of fall off. But now we have, I don't want to say bigger problem, but we have something which is going to completely interrupt our businesses, our photography. So I just want to dive in right now on it, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the business. So what's how you look at this whole AI technology coming in very heavily into photography, because the equipment is a one story, but now we have much bigger thing to fry.
Yeah, I think that my take on AI is probably going to be maybe a little bit different than what some people might expect. I don't think that AI is going to be that much of a threat right now to the majority of portrait photographers specifically.
Mhm.
I think there's going to be some markets and some uh, industries that will be affected by AI. But the majority of photographers probably at this point don't have too much to worry about.
Mhm.
I wouldn't make uh, the tabloid headlines about AI. I wouldn't let that stop me from doing the things I need to do, right?
Mhm.
Which is continuing to get better every single day, continuing to establish my brand and make sure that when someone thinks about portrait photography, when somebody thinks about studio photography, when they think about those things, that they hopefully remember me, right?
Mhm.
And they remember me because of my personality, because of who I am as an individual, which AI will never have, right?
Mhm.
But I think, like, if you think about this right now, um, let's say that somebody wants to do a creative photo shoot with you, and they say, okay, we want you to do your style, really cool, kind of colorful background, shiny. We're going to do some kind of like flower headpiece. Um, if that person wants to get images like that, it is very difficult to get that from AI.
Mhm.
And that's coming from somebody. I use Midjourney.
Mhm.
I'm very familiar with AI. I've been using it over the last few months. If you follow my YouTube channel, some of the thumbnails are actually AI generated thumbnails.
Mhm.
And so from that perspective, it's been very helpful when I need a generic type of image for a video. It's been great for that. But the reality is that if somebody wants a very specific kind of image, AI is not going to give them that.
Mhm.
It's going to give them a general type of image. It's not going to give them specifically what they want. So if a brand tells me, we want a certain photo with a certain color background, certain wardrobe, we want the person looking a certain type of way, there's no prompts that will give you the exact output that you want. And I think that a lot of people, when they see, AI based images, you're seeing a lot of different types of images that AI can generate, but it rarely would ever give you like a set of photographs the way that you would get it if you were sitting down and doing like a proper studio photo shoot. Um, so all of that to say that for the type of work that I create, and I would challenge anybody who's in the chat right now, like, look at one of my images and try recreating it with Midjourney or Dolly or whatever, um, AI that's out there. And I could tell you that, if you're creating the one, that's great. Create an entire set. When I do a photo shoot, I have hundreds of photos, and all of them are unique and different. And I think the other thing too is that, you're working with people, and the way that you work with people, you're able to pull things out of them that AI is never going to have that artistic taste to get like a specific kind of look out of a person. You can't tweak the muscles in the face in a certain way with a prompt in Midjourney. So I think for those people that, you know, they just need an image of some sort, like I did when I would use it for a thumbnail.
Mhm.
Um, it's great. AI is great for that. But I think that in terms of like for business, for people who are out there wanting to have an image of themselves, um, this isn't something that's mainstream. And I
Mhm.
don't see it being a mainstream thing for a very, very long time. Um, I know even for me, it's taken me months to learn how to do
Yeah.
what I know in Midjourney, and I'm in this, and I do this, for a living. So I think the average person who says, "Hey, I want to have a portrait of myself and my family for Christmas," AI is not going to give them that. You
Mhm.
know, they're not going to know how to be able to train the AI to know what they look like, to give them a variety of different poses that actually look like them. It's going to give them something that might look like uncanny valley. It's going to
Mhm.
look.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that's the thing. I don't find it to be so threatening at this point. Maybe in the future it might
Mhm.
get to the point to where you could really, really do what you could do with a person in person, where you can, you know, have that micro control over, poses and expressions and things like that. But it's not really there yet.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm not super scared or concerned
Scared of
about it.
Yeah. Well, so and then also what I want to add to this, as you pointed out, AI is spitting stuff out based on
Right.
what you're gonna say. But being precise with certain things is at this point impossible. Having said that, it seems like this whole thing is progressing, right? Like every new version of Mid Journey, you can see like there's huge jump of
Yeah.
in quality and all this stuff. So let's kind of dive a little bit deeper onto this because I also think that if we can look at this from a little bit of different perspective, AI can help us to develop certain ideas, right? Like so we
Sure.
can come up with some concept, we can run this through AI, see how we can improve it, how we can kind of I don't know just tweak it certain things, how this whole thing is gonna look like. So do you use AI at this point to helping you with your creations, or are you using just strictly just kind of see how this whole thing works, and then what you can kind of get out of this? Because I started slowly creating maybe not exact mood boards, but just kind of throwing some ideas. But as you said also, which is my experience also, is that um at the first glance it looks like, oh, it's amazing, but then when you start analyzing this whole thing, these images, there's a lot of flaws. Like I
Sure.
you can just point it out, okay, this AI is just guessing a lot of things, and then it's far from perfect. So what's your experience on that part?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of said it, like it's far from perfect. And I think for some people, they're okay with not perfect. I
Hmm.
mean, I feel like that's where we are with photography these days. It's like people are okay with not perfect. That's why they don't have a proper camera. That's why they're using their iPhone and showing people their iPhone photos and saying, "Oh, look at this beautiful photo that I took." And it's
Yeah.
like, as a professional photographer, you're kind of like, yeah, it's a photo of a waterfall. Like that's
Yeah.
beautiful waterfall. I wish I could have gone there with my real camera.
Yeah.
You're not going to say that, but
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, I feel like I do see the improvements that are happening with AI. You are seeing it get better with every generation. I do use it at times to um, try to come up with ideas for things. But to be honest, like I was telling you in the beginning, a lot of my inspiration is coming from media. And
Mhm.
so, I'm already I'm already like at max capacity for inspiration. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm already there, and so now it's a matter of like execution.
Yes.
What can I do to execute on some of these ideas? So, I think for people who have wandering minds, it's fine. Like use AI, come up with some cool ideas. But I think what's more important is, okay, so AI just gave you this image that you're like, wow, this is an amazing image. Okay, how do I execute on that?
Yeah.
Chat GPT is not going to tell you how to execute that type of photograph if you're using lighting, if you're using a camera, a lens. Um, you know, it's just going to make you into an AI artist, which is fine. I'm sure that's going to be a thing, but it's not going to replace photography. That
Yeah.
will not happen. And you're even seeing it now with the push. You would think at this point, 2023, that film photography would be dead, and
Mhm.
yet you're seeing the younger generation, right, the Generation Z that's out there. They're going to these old cameras that are behind me. They're going to film,
Mhm.
because they want something that's organic. They want something that they could be proud that they made it, that other people can't do, right? So I don't want to play down the threat of AI, but at the same time, it's like as good as it can get, it's never going to replace you, and it's never going to replace that stamp that you put on it as a human being. That human
Absolutely.
element, I think, is something that is so um, valuable that I don't think AI is ever going to be able to recreate.
Yeah.
Unless maybe Elon Musk makes like a robot, like a physical AI robot that can, hold a camera and, you know what I'm saying, like
Yeah.
talk to people, and that it runs data of me because it knows my search history and my comments on social media. And it's like, okay, Miguel, I know you like these things, so think about this and turn your face towards the light this way. And it has
Mhm.
sensors that can read, the lights. Like we're far away from that.
Far away, yeah.
Very
Also,
far.
what I think, which is also kind of something what I would like to discuss with you, um, it's not the copyrights, but
Mhm.
what I want to talk about it is, when the AI, like you can prompt something, right, and it's gonna come out whatever. It's beautiful image, you like it, whatever. But this is really you what is creating? So that's the one part, right? And the second thing is, you as a photographer with that experience, you remember how much sweat we had to put into like learning some of those stuff. Because I
Oh
remember
yeah.
even switching from wedding photography into headshots. I felt like, well, what's the big of a deal to shoot headshots? I've been doing weddings for 10 years, and I'm sure this is not big of a deal. And then when I start shooting headshots, I'm like, oh my god, like my images looks like shit. Like there's everything is off. The lighting was off. The face expressions were not the way I wanted. How I can get that. And I think, we have so many skills in order to create images. And if AI kind of jump in, like, are you really photographer, or as you said, like you're gonna become like AI artist or whatever, but you're not truly photographer, right? And I think on the flip side also, what I want to point it out is this creative process, what are we going through to put images into life. It's one of the most enjoyable thing for me, for example, like, you're just coming up with the concept and you're just struggling, you're just putting stuff together, you work for the photo shoot, you work with the model, with the makeup artist, you work with the stylist, whatever. You're putting so much work into it to create that image, and this whole process is also something which it's enjoyable. And I think if we're gonna push everything on AI, we're gonna lose all this stuff. So what is your take on this whole thing?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You kind of mentioned the being photographer, and I think that I don't know that people are so worried these days about whether or not they'll be seen as a real photographer or not, especially
Mhm.
with incorporating AI. I think that for a lot of people, it's all about the money. And if they can
Yes.
make money creating imagery with AI where maybe they couldn't have done it with photography,
Mhm.
then they're going to go down that road and they're going to make that happen. But um, yeah, and I don't necessarily see anything specifically wrong with that. I think that with every challenge that comes up along the way with AI getting better, more photographers relying more on AI versus actually, trying to learn skills to be able to execute these things on their own. Um, I think that those people who are trying to learn and they're pushing their work to another level, I don't think they have to worry about those things. I actually like the challenges that AI is bringing, to the
Yes, I
industry and
agree.
to photographers because it's going to force people just like back in the day when digital photography started to come up and all the film photographers were like, it's digital, it's whatever. And now here we are, you couldn't imagine having to go and get a roll of film and take 36 exposures only, like I'd shoot 36 photos like that now. Back in
Mhm.
the day you shot
It
different, right?
really,
So it was a different time, like a
absolutely.
different set of challenges. So to me, I think that with everything that's coming up, we live in such a great time where we have all of this information available to us, just like it's available to AI for it
Mhm.
to learn from. That same information is available to us as individuals to learn from as well. And so that would be my biggest message to people is AI is learning from information that is available on the internet. But
Mhm.
then we're going to go and we're going to say, oh man, this AI is taking all this
Yeah,
business from me. And it's like, it's using the same resources that are available to you as a photographer. Go out there
absolutely.
and go learn something and then do it better than AI. Like
Mhm.
it will get to the point to where, yeah, there's going to be some people that will look at AI and be like, they just have poor taste, in my opinion, and just be like, oh, it's a great image, this is good enough for me. But there's always going to be people out there who want to have that human experience and that human element. And yeah,
That's
I don't see it as a threat.
perfect. So, okay, so let's change topics a little bit. And you also review gear, and I want to talk about it because I know a lot of viewers, that's what they want to hear, that's what they want to talk about it. This is always,
Yeah.
big topic in photography. So I would like to kind of hear your opinion on, do you think we just kind of get to the point that all those adjustments, all those, the new models of cameras, lenses coming out, do you think we reached the kind of the top of the mountain, and the equipment got so good that we don't really kind of see the difference? Or do you think there's still room for improvement? Like, I know there's some little things they can kind of add it here and there, but as far as the image quality, like, I think human eye, this is at least my opinion, cannot really see the difference. Especially we see a lot of stuff, on screens, on phones, or all those, digital, um um yeah, we see them on screens. We don't see them kind of like, in the print, sometimes maybe. So how do you think, where this whole kind of industry is going these days?
Yeah, so I would say two things. In terms of the gear, I don't think that we've reached the top of the mountain yet. I think
Okay.
um, there's still a long way to go.
Okay.
I will say, backing up a little bit, I will say that for me, I'm very careful not to do reviews of gear, like
Okay.
very, very careful. And I haven't shared this, so I'll share this on the podcast, publicly for probably
Hmm.
one of the first times. Um, but I'm very like resistant to doing reviews.
Hmm.
And there's a kind of a big reason for that. The first one being that I feel like for me to do a proper review, like in a perfect world, to me, reviews would happen after like 6 months to a year with a product,
Okay.
right? So if I had, a camera and I've been shooting with the camera for 6 months, I feel like, okay, I've been using it for 6 months. I can give you a proper review of like what's the good, what's the bad, what are things that could improve, because I would be using it all the time and I could actually speak to it with a body of experience behind me. I think it's challenging with where we are today with gear reviews on YouTube, where you have people who and I'm in that boat. I get a lot of this stuff early.
Hmm.
So I have the opportunity to create this type of content, but I'm very careful when I make these videos to say that this is a hands-on, this is first impressions. Because for me to really give a review of the product, like I got to torture test it.
Hmm.
I got to use it indoors, outdoors. I need to use it for a period of time. There's some things that work really well for a week, and the next thing you know, it just stops working and you're like, what the heck, it was great for the week that it
Yeah.
worked,
Yeah.
right? But if I made a video in that week, you would only hear the good and you wouldn't hear the bad side of it.
Hmm.
So I try to be very careful not to do reviews unless it's something where, it's my first impressions, initial impressions, hands-on. And I'm always careful to say like, hey, I've been using it for a couple of weeks and this is what I found so far. Because I don't want people to make buying decisions based off of my 1 week with a product. I mean, maybe for some people that's enough and they're like, oh, Miguel was pretty hyped about it for that week, so maybe
Hmm.
it's good enough for me. That might be all they need, but I feel like the real true reviews take at least 6 months. I
Hmm.
mean, even that is still kind of like the honeymoon phase with a lens or a camera, especially if you're not shooting all the time. But yeah, when it comes to the gear, switching back, when it comes to the gear itself, I think that there's a lot of room to grow with cameras, with the lenses that are being created, what these cameras can do for you. I it's kind of funny not to turn this into a hype piece, but this is the reality for me. I remember when I was in New Jersey, Sony would do a lot of like launch events in New York. And
Hmm.
because I was in New Jersey, they would invite me to these events and it never failed. And there were people that I could call right now who'd be like, I was sitting next to him when we had this conversation. I would be sitting there with my camera and I'm like, listen, it doesn't matter what they're about to announce. I'm very happy with what I have.
Hmm.
Right. And then they get up there and they start talking about the new equipment that's coming out and all the features. And in my head, 2 minutes before they went up there, I thought this camera was already the top of the mountain. And now
Hmm.
they just made the mountain like 10,000 feet higher.
Hmm.
Right. And then a few years pass and then they just added another 10,000 feet to an already giant mountain, right?
Mhm.
So I've kind of learned over time that these companies don't stop. They're always innovating. They're always coming up with new ideas. Until images get better than what I'm seeing with the human eye, I don't think that we've reached the top of the mountain, you
Mhm.
know, until these cameras can basically, like, I think of an image and push a button and it creates that.
Mhm.
I like that to me is like, okay, we're done at this
You're
point.
done
Like,
here.
it doesn't get any better than that. But we're not there yet. There's still a lot of innovation happening. You know, photography, funny enough, with especially with camera lenses, you know, they've been like decent, like good enough for probably like 30 or 40 years. And people have been cool with that. And now you're seeing a lot of innovation in lenses, you know,
Mhm.
and in performance of lenses. And so, you know, areas of photography that you didn't think needed improvement all of a sudden are getting improvement. And now it's like, oh, what if there was a lens that could do this, right? What
Mhm.
if they can make it smaller? What if they can give me a wider focal range? Like, you're seeing a lot of that, you know, in the market today. And so I think it's an exciting time for photographers. Like, there's just a lot of great stuff. The prices have gone down a lot.
Mhm.
You know, like I had the opportunity to create content for this new camera that had just been announced that comes out next month. And that feature set, like, if I just wrote down the features on paper and I would have given it to myself 5 years ago, the camera would have easily been like five, six, seven, maybe even $8,000 for a camera like that, and it's $1,400 today.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's crazy. Like,
Yeah.
it's madness. Like,
But
it's
also, you know what?
insane.
I think back in the days, you know, when I remember, well, with the wedding photography, right? Like when I started in whatever 2006 or something, we were buying cameras like for I don't know 3 4 years. Now they coming up like every what they have every 6 months or like every
Mhm.
every year they coming up with new model. So I think the progress is just going much quicker, and I 100% agree with you that like they have this model which they saying this is the best thing ever, like you have everything what you need, and then 6 months down the road they like, okay, you know what, there's another layer which we're going to add to this, right? So I think with the technology, it's just fascinating for me how quick this whole thing is going, right? Like it's just absolutely insane. Because even like back in like really back when I was a kid, I remember my dad, he bought a camera and he has this camera for whole life. And it was like Canon something. And I remember he just spent all his money he probably had at that moment because he had this opportunity to buy this, and he had this camera for like decades and decades and still working, believe it or not.
Wow.
And
Yeah, I believe it.
nowadays, yeah, and nowadays, like we just kind of getting this whole thing every few months. There's something new on the table which is just attracting, and they have these little features which they kind of like, wow, you know what, I really need this. So they
Yeah,
kind of
you know, it's interesting that you say that, because I had a very similar feeling where it's like every few months there's something new coming out, and I felt like that experience was very new to like modern times with photography. And then I started to collect cameras, which is
Mhm.
what you're
I can
seeing
see it,
behind
yeah.
me.
That's
um
amazing, by the way.
Thank you. So, and it's funny, a lot of it was like I started with just, I wanted these like seven specific cameras to have in my office, and it became, I think I have like almost 200 cameras
Oh wow.
in the museum, and they're all Sony and Minolta. So God forbid if I expanded to other brands, I'd, you know, my whole studio
Mhm.
would be filled up. But what I found to be really interesting, and I don't even have every single model, like there's still, yeah, I might have half of what was made from, we'll say, I mean, the earliest camera that I have up here is in like the early or mid to, I would say mid 80s.
Oh wow.
But the lion's share of them are like late 90s to like 2010, 2011. And, you know, if I had looked at these models and I was to say, okay, there's probably maybe 70 or so models that are up there that came out in that period of time. And if you divide that by a decade, they were coming out with a lot of cameras over the course of
Yeah.
that period of time. From our perspective, the way that we were buying cameras in the 2000s, we go to Best Buy, or we go to Circuit City, or we go to Comp USA, or whatever the big retailers are in Canada, and they would only carry a handful of models. And
Mm-hmm.
other places would carry, like if you go to a photo specialty store, they would have, specific models that maybe those other stores didn't have. Um, so I think it's always been like that. Like they've always come out with a bunch of cameras in a short period of time. But I just think for now, because we have so much exposure to media, and because we have so much exposure to like whatever model that comes out, we could actually just go and buy it, and maybe you could even have it same day with Amazon or something.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like that in the 2000s. I worked in retail at the time, and we didn't have every Sony camera. We didn't have every Canon and Nikon and Minolta and Yashica and
Yeah.
Agfa. Like we had the models that we had, and that was it. And Best Buy would have the ones they had, and Photo Wolf would have the ones that they had, and Ritz would have the ones that they have.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality was these companies were churning out new cameras, probably even more than what we're seeing today.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a narrative, I think, that has come up in the last few years, where it's like, oh, another camera, and people
Mm-hmm.
are surprised, and it's like, dude, this has been going on now for like 20
Yeah.
plus years. Like technology expands, and as technology gets better, competition is such, like you got to come up with something new, or else you get
You're
left
dying.
behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also what I think is, back in the days, they didn't do as much advertising when the new camera was coming out, I guess,
Right.
right? Because
True.
nowadays we're living in the kind of internet era where, every new model coming out, there's basically advertising everywhere, not to mention, we have all those influencers and YouTube channels and all these places where we can kind of see what is coming up.
Right.
So that's, I think it's a huge difference. So speaking of your cameras, it seems like you have a lot of them. Is there
Yeah.
any particular model or camera which you have this kind of emotional connection, or there's something special about it,
Um,
or you love all of them the same way?
no, no, no. You know, that's a difficult one to answer. I, I,
Hmm.
I think that probably the one that would maybe have the emotional tie for me would be I think it was the 707 was the first one. So this was
Oh,
the
wow.
first digital camera when I worked at the mall, when I worked at that camera store. This was the first digital camera that I owned.
Oh, wow.
I had this, and I had I don't remember the camcorder, but I had like a mini DV camcorder at the time. And so I would take this device and my camcorder, and I would go to my car shows, and I'd, take photos with this thing. And I just remember feeling like this was so high tech at the time.
Mhm.
Like I felt like every time I would show up at a show and I'd pull this thing out, and I'm, swiveling the camera and getting low angles and stuff, I felt cool.
Like,
Because like everybody back in those days were like,
that's
they had
that's the
these,
real guy, hey?
they're out there with their like very boring looking,
Yeah, yeah.
SLR cameras. And, if you see this all the time, and then all of a sudden someone shows up with this, it's like, dude, that guy is like next level.
Next level.
He's the future, So,
Absolutely.
so like that for me probably has the most like fond memories, because I just remember feeling so cool when I would show up at like anywhere with this camera, and people are like, "What's that?" Um,
That's
it was
awesome.
fun. It was good times.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's jump into the business portion of our conversation,
Mhm.
and then we can take some questions. You guys can start sending them out, so we have them already here, and then we can start asking. So tell me how we can survive these days. After COVID, everyone got hit. We talk a little bit about it, and the industry have changed drastically. So what would be your advice to make a living as a photographer these days? Because this is another big question everyone is asking. We both know you have to hustle pretty much 24/7 to make a living in this industry. I'm not saying it's getting easier. I think it's getting a little bit tougher. But what we can do, I know the time, we dedicated to build our business is a one thing, because you cannot these days build a business overnight. We all know
No.
that. So what would be your advice to those photographers who are out starting off, or they struggling a little bit? What we can do to somehow, make this profitable business?
So I think it's twofold. The first thing that I would say, and this was my general approach to life in general, which is to follow the money,
Yes.
right? So if you know that there are certain groups, certain organizations, certain categories of and segments of the population that are spending money on photography, you need to identify who they are and how you can get in front of them.
Hmm.
And it takes me to the second part, which is basically getting in front of those people. I think a lot of photographers, it's the weirdest thing to me. They create all these images, and maybe they share them on their Facebook, and it's a closed ecosystem of people that they share their work with. And then they wonder, like, oh man, my photography business isn't doing great. I ran a promo on Facebook, or I ran a promo in on Instagram, and maybe you only have friends and family that follow you on Instagram. You have to think beyond that, and you have to think, okay, in my area, how can I be known for whatever kind of photography that you do? If you're a wedding photographer, if someone is getting married today, how can you make them think and know that you exist in their area, and that that's what you do and that's what you specialize in? And I think that's probably the hardest thing for a lot of people, because they don't do anything. They just they show that it's like, okay, I bought my camera, I am now a photographer, I'm going to sit here until someone hires me.
Hmm.
And it's like, there's people walking outside right now 20 feet away from me that have no idea that I'm in here with my camera and that I can create images. And they may want a photographer that has the techniques that I have, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's the hardest thing right now, is like people getting out of this mindset that just business is just going to come, and if it's not coming, it's just something is wrong with the business. You have to market yourself, you have to put yourself out there, and you can't just do it every so often. You have to do it all the time.
Hmm.
And so what I recommend to people as a baseline is get on YouTube.
Hmm.
YouTube is one of the biggest search engines. It's the second biggest search engine behind Google, right?
Hmm.
And so when somebody searches for photography, right, when they search on Google, YouTube shows up as a search result as well. So I would be trying to hit SEO for those things. I'd try to hit, you know, Calgary portrait photographer.
Hmm.
And if they search that they find you specifically. I would be in groups. I would go to networking events where, you know, people who would be interested in my kind of imagery, that they know, hey, I met this guy Miguel at this networking event, and he's a really nice guy. And when the time comes that they need photography, they will hopefully remember me, right?
Hmm.
So we just have to do a better job as photographers of just marketing ourselves, because the one thing I hear all the time is like, oh, my imagery speaks for itself. And it's like, yeah, but it speaks in a vacuum. Like, if
Hmm.
it's speaking in a room filled with nobody,
Yeah.
so you need to give it legs. You have to, it's good that it speaks for itself, but put some wheels on it and push it out
Push
into
it
the middle
forward.
of traffic. You know what I mean? And then great, now it's speaking to a large group of people that hopefully see it and say, hey, I want to work with this person, right?
Hmm.
So from a business perspective, I think that's the biggest thing. Like, you have to put yourself out there. um, this isn't something that, especially in the beginning, if you're struggling right now,
Hmm.
this isn't something that tomorrow is just going to be better and you'll live happily ever after. Like, it is a grind in the beginning. You
Hmm.
have to constantly be putting yourself out there, putting out new work, finding new clients, going to networking events, collaborating with other people.
Hmm.
You'd be surprised over the years, especially early on. I had so many opportunities that came from other photographers, makeup artists that I work with, vendors when I was doing the wedding stuff. that would basically refer business to me, and it was all word of mouth. And early on it got to the point to where just the word of mouth stuff, I could not do it all.
Mhm.
I didn't have the capacity, and I was like, man, I left a lot of money on the table because I just couldn't handle all of that at
All
the
this stuff.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's the two biggest things that I would say. You know it's not going to be easy,
Mhm.
but it's one of those things, just like exercise, that if you show up to the gym, you do the reps, you will have results. Like,
Absolutely.
the only way you don't have results is if you don't show up and you don't do the work. Photography is very much the same way. If you do the work, you will get the results. You just have to make sure you're putting yourself out there.
Absolutely. Perfect. Okay, so let's see if there's any questions. And then we can kind of, it's Rafael Ortiz says that he thought that having 11 cameras was too much. So looking at your background, I think you're doing okay.
Yeah, I thought, honestly, like, a lot of the cameras behind me, most of them work, but this was a YouTube set at first. It was going to be just a set that I built that whenever I wanted to record content, I could just sit down and the
Just kind of,
lights are on and it's just
yeah.
there. And what's going to ultimately happen is that I'm shooting with these cameras and I'm creating content, because that passion, just like you asked me about, like the cameras that stir up that passion, there's a lot of cameras up there that over the course of the years I've had experience with and have memories with. And and I want to go out there and relive some of that stuff. So I'm going out there and doing photo shoots with these old cameras and trying to see if I can make good images with it.
So how many cameras are there? How many have
Um,
did you?
right now there's close to 200.
Wow.
So, and they're not all up on the shelf because I don't have the shelf space, but
Oh wow.
and it curves on the side here. But yeah, there's close to 200.
And you've been collecting them over the years, or it's just like it was like one bunch you start kind of buying them?
No, so it started probably a little over a year ago. I just wanted a few cameras. There were some
Okay.
specific models that I was like, from a collector's perspective, I'd love to have them.
Okay.
And so I'd go to thrift stores and I'd find other cameras,
Mhm.
and some of them would be at a good price. And I'm like, that's pretty cheap. It's $5.
Yeah.
Let me go ahead and buy that. And next thing you know, you've got 30
200.
cameras. And then, you know, uh, you start thinking, okay, well, maybe I could just get all of the cameras of this kind,
Okay.
and then all of a sudden, yeah, you end up with more cameras than what you know what to do with.
Yeah. Yeah.
This has been a year and a half, almost 2 years, that I've been collecting
Collecting
and
those.
still
Wow.
getting new stuff every week.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of out there that
Yeah,
you
I
can
mean,
get.
it's scary. It's
Scary. Yeah.
it's very scary. Like, I thought to myself, 35 millimeter cameras, just to give you an example, on the Minolta side, I was thinking, okay, there can't be that many cameras, right? Because we're talking about, like, here every 6 months there's a new camera. So I was like, it must have been like every 3 or 4 years that a new camera would come out, maybe 5 or 6 years. Let me tell you, there's a lot of cameras that came out from like the 1930s to the 1990s, and I'm still like,
Yeah.
I barely scratched the surface of everything that's available, that's come out.
So
So
are you gonna put stop to it, or are you just gonna keep buying them to just kind of collect as many as you can?
yeah, I
What's
think
the
I
plan?
think for now it's, I'll probably end up getting some more. And once I feel like I've picked up the ones that I really like I'll probably taper it off. And if I see a good deal on one, maybe I'll pick it up. But yeah, it's been fun. It's fun to have some of these old cameras and just have those memories of what it was like shooting digital back when digital was this emerging technology. And so and it's a good challenge as well. We're pretty spoiled nowadays with our cameras and how good they are. And so taking some of these old cameras out and shooting with them, it's fun. I've been enjoying the process of using these things. So the weirder the better. Like, some
Yes.
of these old cameras are very weird, and so it's just fun to go out and do it.
Okay, so we have some questions. Okay, so T. Jones, getting into headshot photography from weddings and senior portraits. Should I have niche in headshot photography, or is it such a thing for headshots? Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, first, thank you, T. Jones. I appreciate the support and the kind words. If you're getting into headshot photography, there's definitely different categories of headshots because there's different kinds of people that are going to need headshots, and each style, like for each need, there's a certain look that is kind of the standard. So, yeah, I mean, I think there is such a thing as different niches and categories of headshots, and but at the same time, like you could learn the skills to be able to spread yourself across all of those different styles. So if it's an actor, if it's a singer, an artist of some sort, if it's a professional, an executive, all these different kinds of headshots have a certain standard to them. And many of them could just be how you compose the shots that make them different. Some is how you're lighting them. Some are on location usually. Some are in a studio usually. So if you learn how to do all of them, you're a little bit more well-rounded, right? So it's different, but also very similar because it's a person that you're photographing. It's just what is the outcome of this headshot? Are they using this headshot to market their business? Are they using this headshot to land a role for a movie? Are they using a headshot as promotion for their music? Is it a model that's using it, to land casting, getting casting opportunities? Like understanding what is this image for so that you can make the best image and deliver the best image that gets them whatever their goal is.
Yeah. If I can
What do
add,
you think?
what you just said, yeah, it's good to have in your portfolio a variety of different options. So, the clients definitely can choose whatever works best for them. And I think for the last decade, headshot photography have changed dramatically, because back in the days was just the passport photos. Nowadays, we're getting into more specific and more detailed approach where photographers looking for specific style, for a specific background, for specific outcome. So it's definitely a niche, but in order to reach much broader clientele, you need to kind of showcase them where you are capable of doing. Perfect. Okay, so the next question is from David. I think it's for you because you are Sony shooter, right?
So with the advent of Sony sensors now competing with medium format sensors, what do you think may happen to the price of medium format cameras? Um, so I don't think that it's going to affect medium format pricing at all. Um, it's kind of like I liken this to like, and it's totally different, but I liken this to cars, right? Luxury cars are not going to affect the pricing of like your everyday consumer stuff. Um, so I think when it comes to sensors, yes, full frame sensors are getting very good to the point to where, you know, medium format doesn't look as appealing for like the general audience, but there is still a group that is out there who shoot campaigns, who do a certain type of work that they just love medium format, and they specifically just love the look that comes from medium format, to where they're willing to spend the money to buy those cameras, even though the autofocus is not as good, even though it doesn't give you the frames per second, it doesn't give you the versatility, doesn't shoot video. I think that um, there are certain things and certain things that basically medium format brings to the table that I don't think, like for those people who use medium format, they don't look at full frame. They don't care. But for the average photographer that's out there, the working professionals that are out there doing weddings and portraits, I don't really see the draw to medium format, and I see everything, even though I'm a Sony shooter, I'm a Sony ambassador. I see everything, and I'm always looking at the market and seeing what's out there. And being a portrait photographer, I don't think that medium format offers something that's so awesome that I would want to jump to medium format. Um, but I don't think it's going to do anything to the price of medium format. I think medium format will always be expensive because medium format is medium format. It's very niche, and it's going to be what it's going to be. You know, it's not going to affect us shooting full frame. It's not going to affect us shooting APS-C, micro four thirds, 1-inch sensor cameras. It's going to be its own thing over there, and we're going to do our own thing over here, and it's going to be hopefully okay for everybody.
Perfect. Sweet. Okay, I think there's no more questions, so I think we can slowly wrap this up. Miguel, thank you so much for this conversation. That was truly an honor to have you on my podcast. I think we cover some of the interesting questions, and this is the questions which I've been bombarded lately. So thank you for answering some of this stuff, because I know people want to kind of, I don't know, hear those things from professionals and then someone who has been in this industry for so many years. And people know you, so I still gonna tag all the informations where people can find you, where people can find your work. You're, I think, so known to this industry that you don't need much of an introduction and stuff, but I'm
Hey,
gonna add it
I will take
anyways.
every single boost that I could get. So
Absolutely, absolutely,
if there's
for
one
sure.
person out there who's watching who's never seen me or seen my stuff, I welcome them with open arms. Like,
Well, they
let's
probably live in
do
the
something.
woods somewhere if they don't know who you are, but
You know, it happens, man. Listen, it happens. Like and I'm okay with that. You know, that just makes me have to work harder. So
absolutely. Well, every every time we can get some boost of what do we do, it's always helps, right? That's for sure.
absolutely. Yep. You never look a gift horse in the mouth. You know, I'm happy to get every eyeball that I can possibly get on my work and what I do, and hopefully it's of some sort of value to those people who go out there and see it. So
Absolutely. And I think, having those conversations among us also is extremely important, right? Because I remember back in the days, photographers were like, really, everyone was living in their own bubble and nobody wants to talk to each other. I think now we're living in a little bit of different world where we speak more freely, openly, we connect, we discuss things, we basically have those interesting chats about the industry. I think that's extremely important. So that's why, I'm so extremely thankful for you to joining this podcast and talking to me. I truly appreciate it.
well, I appreciate you having me, and keep up the great work. Thank you for introducing me and having me talk to you and talk to your audience, and just appreciate the opportunity. It's been great.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.